But first, I would like to ask you, gentlemen, any one of you could go first. Like, what are your thoughts as it pertains to the statue?
Please, I'll let Mr.
Go ahead, Mr. Rahming.
Speak to the statue.
And into the mic.
I mean, the irony of it, I think you were there that day when we were discussing the issue. I mean, for me, I think that the origin of the statue is one that always brings a perplex in my mind, because the governor at the time was the governor at the time was a progressive, and the reasoning behind it was to demonstrate to those who were against the pro-abolition of slavery or the freedom of slaves. It was a sort of in-your-face gesture. And I think one of the things that historians sort of stare blankly as, why would he use Christopher Columbus? And I think what I think Sean McQueen was saying to me at the time was that the governor wouldn't have been aware of some of the crimes that Columbus would have committed. And it's only until now we've become truly educated on the true crimes of Columbus. And so you have historians divided on one side. One, if you move a Christopher Columbus statue, you then set a precedent that anytime you go inside of Bahamian history and you find something you dislike, do you then go and move that statue? So my position on the issue is that, one, I do believe that I have some concerns about the statue existing there, particularly in the way it has been exhibited in downtown. I don't know. I'm not certain as to how the story is told, but I do believe that one, as a country, we ought to build institutions that host history in a way where we could tell a time log of what sequence of events in a given place, and that we should utilize that. I would even go as far as putting the governor out there to tell a real story about what happened. So that's my view. I'm not. The issue is deep. I mean, some people say that it speaks to who we are as a people, and we should put a Bahamian hero there. But I think that if you want to preserve the story, the replacement should be Governor Carmichael.
And again, I appreciate that view. I think that's a mature take.
It is.
It's very much the view that I've expounded somewhat publicly. I live in the shadow of Columbus' statue, and that's how I was able to see Mr. Rahming when he was making his speech at that time. I think was more to move him, but and living there for 20 odd years, I've had plenty of time to look at him and think about him and why he's there and how he got there. And the story is correct that Governor Carmichael at the time, who was an abolitionist, who in fact the white establishment at the time, descendants of whom are still very much in power there, fought like hell to get him out of the Bahamas, and in fact pushed him out. And he ended up further down south, but he continued along the policy of abolition. And the placing of Columbus where he put him was a very much in-your-face statement. He had originally wanted to put that statue in Parliament Square, and the powers that be at the time objected. He fought them so hard that he had actually put some of the members of Parliament in jail for things like beating slaves and for their attitudes towards especially female slaves. And Carmichael gets his name from him because he actually built a church out in Carmichael where there was a community of free black men. And he associated with them and went to church with them rather than with the powers that be in town, the white powers that be in town. And it was, in fact, those people who raised the money to build a statue, which they thought was going to be of him when they understood that he was leaving, and they gave him the money. So this money was raised by black people to build this particular statue. And they gave him the money to build a statue, a memorial. Now, history doesn't record why he chose Columbus. I think he chose Columbus for the reason that he felt that those powers that be in town couldn't fight Columbus. All right? This is the man who discovered from the New World. What can you say to this? All right? And it's not the Queen, it's not somebody else, but these monies paid by these free black people For sure, it wasn't going to be Pompey. Now, that's something we can come back to. Hopefully, we have the time. We should have a statue of Pompey. It should not just be a museum. There should be a great statue of great Pompey. All right? Somewhere in the Bahamas, in Nassau, probably one here and one in Exuma. Okay? So, and the story of Pompey and what he meant to people like Carmichael, who used that story when arguing for abolition in Britain, should be something that should be memorialized here as well. But that particular statue in front of Government House was paid for by free black men. And it was supposed to be in Rawson Square, Parliament Square. There was violent objection to that. No way are we going to allow a statue paid for by black people to be in the front of our parliament. You cannot do it. They commissioned the statue of Victoria and put it there before he could put Columbus there. That's how the Queen Victoria statue got there. And he had power over Government Hill. And you have to remember, at the time, Government House was the seat of power. The governor still ran the country on behalf of the Queen, effectively through the parliament, but still, it was the seat of power. And they couldn't stop him from putting it in front of Government House, which was the house that still represents the authority of the Queen. And here is now a statue paid for by free blacks to this day, sitting on Government House, poetically looking down at Vondu House, which is the slave market. And so it is not so much for me about even who the statue, it could have been the Bugs Bunny that they decided to make a statue of. It doesn't matter to me who the statue is. All right? Yes, Columbus is the greatest mass murderer in history, and all of the rest of it is true. And Mr. Rahming, I actually challenged Mr. McSweeney. If you look at the history, you will see that Columbus and his brother they were trying to try them for the horrendous things that when they found out what they were doing in the New World, they were actually going to be put on trial in Portugal and Italy. So it was known that they were...
They got the reports.
Okay, that they were brutes. More than brutes, they were mass murderers. But for me, it's not about the statue. It is about who put it there and why, who paid for it, what it symbolizes. The fact that free blacks at that time put that statue there and it's looking down at Vondu House, which is the slave market, by which some of their ancestry would have arrived, their recent ancestry, if not some of them, would have come by. It is a sign of great triumph to me, and a sign of great triumph and of resistance. But, we could speak more to Columbus and the irony of it all.
Yeah, because I find that very ironic how you have the person that sort of ignited the transatlantic slave trade looking down at the slave market.
Did he ignite the transatlantic slave trade, though?
I mean, that could be debated.
I think that could be debated. But was he a slaver?
No.
That cannot be debated.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. But that you will have it looking down as paid for by free blacks. The reason that is there is a symbol of defiance.
Okay.
Now, what do we do? How do we tell that story? Because that story must be told. It can't just be there that we have embraced Columbus standing in front of Government House because nobody would know the depth of our story. So, in thinking about it, sometimes you think about these things, you think about it too long and you have too much time and you can think over it over a meditation or two. And so you know what we should do with him? We should just paint him from head to toe black. And it should be the Black Columbus. I look in Mexico City right now, there are riots. They've got the army protecting the statue of Columbus because them people want that statue gone. All right? It's a certain statue that they don't want, and it's Columbus because of the history. And there's so much talk around it. And I would say, hey, why don't we blackface our Columbus? Why don't we tar and feather him? Why don't we paint him from head to toe black and let it now be the story on the tourist map to say, hey, there's a Black Columbus in the Bahamas in front of the Government House. Well, why is that? Well, it was paid for by black people. And yet they recognized that he was a mass murderer, but they also recognized that the place that he set first in the New World was the Bahamas. That is historical wealth. That is not historical garbage.
Just to interject on the historical aspect of it. I remember some of my colleagues criticized me on what political implications championing Columbus may have, particularly if you look at San Salvador. When we change Columbus Day or Discovery Day to National Heroes Day, San Salvador took an economic hit. People no longer came there on Columbus. People no longer came to celebrate Columbus Day. Now, even though it had negative connotations, that small community in the Bahamas took an economic view that, listen, man, this story, despite the story in the way it's told for them, has an economic positivity to them. And so my approach to all of these things has often been, we live in a democracy, right? There are people who say that we should tear it down, we should destroy it, we should paint it. And so the approach I thought that we ought to take was to use the instruments of Parliament. Parliament gave us the authority to, as Bahamians, to petition our government to look at a situation. That if we petition them, through that petition, we could have an honest dialogue as to what should be done. And I thought that Craig, who started the petition online, who had won like 15,000 Bahamians. Now, I do believe that we go through these impulses in our country where we have these social revolts, whether around the world, and that influence how we see ourselves. And so I think the approach I would take, not to destroy the statue, but to let us have a petition in Parliament, let us debate where it should go. By now, we should have a new Parliament. You should agree, we should have a new Parliament. And if we have a new Parliament, we use the old Parliament as a museum. And then you could really tell the story. You could paint it black if you wish, but you could tell the story of what happened. So I think the challenge we have in the Bahamas is we still occupy everything the British have left for us, the British Parliament. And so we have to find a way to outgrow these these institutions.
Right. Continuing on the idea of outgrowing the past, I think that's a very important thing because we currently, I believe, live not only a postmodern, but it's almost a postmodern world because of the availability of internet and communication. You see the story of Columbus being something that has existed for a long time where people know about the ills that he's done, but now anyone can go online and find out about them. You know, a lot of my education on colonialism and the woes of imperialism have been through the internet. And through that spreading of knowledge, you see more community engagement taking place. You see things like the Arab Spring. You see things like Black Lives Matter. So the ability for people to mobilize around ideas has increased because the dissemination of information has increased. Now, information is important because information shapes the narrative, and that narrative, it shapes your whole paradigm of who you are as an individual, because it's not only about where you were born into, but it's about where you will die and how will that place be when you're gone. You know, we look at the past and we acknowledge the past, but we must also acknowledge that there's a future. Now, who's responsible for the future? Every single one of us. That future may only be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be years and generations. So even though, yes, the past is something that there's a lot of guilt about and that we are pushed to think about what a decision is that should be made, we are equally empowered to think about what should be the choice today for the future. My perspective is that statues do shape common ideas about who we are as people. You think about when tourists go on tours around the Bahamas, they say, this is Columbus statue, this is the Queen Victoria statue. So not only is the Bahamas have a local narrative, but we have the ability to tell other people our story because we're a premier tourist destination. So my point of view is that we don't necessarily need a top-down approach. I believe our approach can be from the bottom up, grassroots, and look at it and say the only reason that Columbus and Queen Victoria are the biggest statues are because they have the most publicity. The same way free blacks were able to come together and create a statue for a common purpose and have that represent something, we are just as equally equipped as people to come together, pool our resources, and create a symbol that represents something which people can band around and have that same support for. Now, the amount of investment that we put into that varies, but understand that right now, Columbus is viewed as this prime statue because we are just now aware that statues really do matter, and we think about what is our identity connected to, and we are realizing that there's been a deprivation of art and cultural development, and that's made us react and say, okay, we have to look at what exists. And when we take an honest opinion, what does everybody know? Columbus statue, Queen Victoria. when there's a depth of history that hasn't been taught to people and hasn't been built on and progressed forward, because we've had a complete dissemination of a wrong narrative, and not the narrative which is that Bahamian art has the potential to unite people and our ideas have the potential to unite people, but they have to be common and they have to then be shared at that same time. So my idea is bring people together and make new statues and new monuments until we have the point where we're like, we've been doing this for so long, we might as well now get to the point where we can change Columbus. But it starts small.
One of the things, I think, go back to Sean McQueen, he's making the same arguments. That's the fact that the reason we have these challenges is we haven't really outgrown these statues by building new statues. So the challenge of this is this though. How do we get Bahamians to agree on what a statue should be, who it should be of? And look at how our politics has suddenly decayed over the period of time. So if I said, okay, look at the statue of St. Lyndon by the airport. That's probably but this high. And look at the statue of Columbus. And look at the statue of St. Milo Butler opposite Queen Victoria. And so you sort of ask the question, how do we see ourselves? Do we value the importance of investing in statues to the extent where we magnify these people as great Bahamian historians? Can we agree that John should be a statue and rather than Paul? Will it invoke the kind of political differences where I could be of a political party and say, well, I don't agree that he should have a statue because of my political persuasion? Can we have the maturity to agree that despite our political differences, that some Bahamians have done some great things for this country and we should honor them through using taxpayers' dollars, but with statues?
But it goes deeper, and I think the point that you make is powerful, and as you point to it, immediately to politics, and we have built statues, but we've built statues, we built flowers and crawfish and pigeons. Okay, all right,
yeah.
Okay, and but there again, I say that sarcastically, but also with some kind of niceness, because that is what we're reflecting to. We're looking still at our environment, and this is how we're identifying ourselves with the things around us, with the nature around us, and that's a beautiful thing. Okay, and that's what we want to monumentalize is the nature around us, the beauty around us, and so that too is nice, eh? That too is very nice. But even as we talk about these statues, we had Craig Flowers who spent millions of dollars, literally, on those statues out at Ronnie Butler and Peanuts Taylor. Out at those, every one of those statues cost almost $1 million. People don't know that, but they aren't cheap. So, but let's think about what you said, Milo Butler, because it strikes me. I live downtown, and I always stand there and I look at that, and I said, look at what we do to ourselves, and look at how strong the colonial dictate is, even in our minds. We erect a statue of our freedom fighter, our liberator, and put him across the way, not in Parliament Square, across where there was water. That land is reclaimed where Milo Butler is, and have him half a man. Think about the symbology of that. Half a man looking up across the road from the power of Parliament at the Queen.
And he's in a submissive position as well.
He's
with a hand, low and hand.
Low,
yeah.
and hand up to the Queen.
Yeah.
Okay? And she's sitting with her hand on her mace and her power, looking down at him. And that is what we erect as a symbol as a free black people, as our symbol of freedom. Clearly not. All right? So even in the mindset, clearly not. There are persons in our history who are outside of our present politics. You heard what I said, Pompey.
Yeah, Pompey and Paul Black and Little Black Paul Black.
Okay, we don't have to debate that.
No.
There's no debate in that. And we could build a 50-foot statue to Pompey. All right? And it's not even about the so-called taxpayers' money. We could challenge the young people to do it. Okay, and then find a way to preserve it. We could build a Pompey out of John Canoe and challenge the people to preserve it, to find a way to preserve it. Yeah. Okay? So, but we haven't even done that out of a John Canoe piece and find a place to honor it and put it and place it.
So,
okay,
the one thing that has been done since I've last been on the show is the box. So, when we were first on the show, we had the first little art piece, as we
Back
remember.
when it was March?
When the pandemic first started kicking off. And we talked about art as being a potential for development. And largely thanks to the help of Mr. Botswick, we had the ability to construct a 6x6 wooden black box and invite Bahamian artists to come and paint on it and design it. And we set up at the Tinfro Park, which is also now a pretty historic place in terms of what that is represented. And
Before
over
and after.
6 weeks, we've had the ability to, while it was there, we need to move at this point, actually. Maybe that is it. We made this monument to represent Bahamian creativity, innovation, culture, and had so many people come together. And now we have an opportunity to even move this box somewhere. My idea is, again, how do you move the box to a place that can represent something? And that box, in terms of budget, with everything included, was not more than $5,000 to make a box. And it's only 6 feet. You could easily, you think about, who has to do it? A lot of people have land. A lot of people live in different constituencies, different neighborhoods, have private buildings. People can come together on the land that they own, come to agreement and say, let's invest in Bahamian art or a Bahamian monument. And that can take not more than hundreds or thousands of dollars to make. And you could do it mass. You could build a campaign now over the next year to have easily over 100 of them built in different places and have them sponsored by private businesses or public entities and litter the entire country with stories and expression, and think about how that changes the narrative for the people who see them as well as the people who take part in it. And I think that's been our example of taking a stand of not something huge. It's not anything abrasive. It's a small step to represent something and show what is possible when some people can come together. So my pitch is a lot of monuments and a lot of boxes.